Millionaire boss laughed when poor girl claimed to speak 9 languages, but she deciphered a document no expert could. A millionaire CEO challenges his humble cleaning lady's daughter to translate a complex document. To his astonishment, she not only translates it, but also uncovers a hidden secret within its pages that changes everything. The boardroom on the top floor of Sterling and Associates was thick with tension. The air conditioning seemed to be losing the battle against the heat radiating from the nervous faces around the table. Seated were 5 men and 2 women, all millionaires and partners of Arthur Sterling, staring intently at a multi-page document spread across the glass table. Arthur, the firm's president and owner, had loosened his tie, his palms slick with sweat. "This is worth millions and the deadline is tonight," he said, his voice hoarse with worry. "If we don't translate this with perfect accuracy, the contract goes to a competitor." They had already hired 3 renowned translators, paid for expensive software, and even consulted with international universities. Nothing. The document, written in a rare mix of ancient languages and obscure dialects, resisted every attempt at a complete translation. What was at stake wasn't just money, but a strategic opportunity that could redefine their business. In the corner of the room, Teresa, the cleaning lady, stood quietly, waiting for the meeting to end so she could clean the space. Beside her, her 13-year-old daughter, Isabella, held a worn backpack and watched everything with keen eyes. She was there because her school was closed due to a teacher's strike and she had nowhere else to go. In a fit of impatience, Arthur slammed his palm on the table. "I'd pay anything to get this translated right now," he exclaimed. Without thinking, Teresa commented in a low voice, "My daughter speaks 9 languages." The sentence, a simple statement of pride for her, echoed in the silent room like a challenge. Arthur threw his head back and let out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the walls. It was contagious. The other partners joined in, some shaking their heads as if it were the joke of the year. 9 languages, he said, still chuckling. "And you think she can translate this? Something that experts from around the world couldn't crack?" Isabella, her expression calm, took a step forward. "I can try," she said, her voice steady. Arthur crossed his arms, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "Knock yourself out, kid. Here's the document. Let's see what all this confidence is about." He slid the stack of papers toward her. Silence fell over the room. The girl sat down, ran her fingers over the lines of text, and with an expression of deep concentration began to murmur words in different languages. The sounds were strange to those who didn't understand, but they carried a certainty no one expected to see in a teenager. After a few minutes, Isabella looked up, her words making everyone in the room hold their breath. "I think I found something you all missed." The silence that followed Isabella's comment was surreal. Moments before, the room had been filled with laughter and scorn. Now everyone was frozen, watching this small girl flip through the pages with a calm that was almost irritating to people accustomed to instant results. Arthur, still wearing a smirk, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. But he wasn't laughing anymore. His curiosity had overcome his pride, though he'd never admit it. "All right, young lady," he said in a more subdued tone. "What exactly do you think you've found?" Isabella didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned the second page again, her finger tracing the lines of strange symbols and disjointed words. She took a deep breath and spoke in a low, firm voice. "These sentences aren't just in one language. They switch languages mid-sentence. It's like a code, designed to stop any machine translation from working." The partners exchanged glances. One of them, a stern-looking man named Mr. Davies, frowned. "And you think you can break this code?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. The girl offered a slight smile. "I don't think so. I know so." Teresa, still in the corner, wrung a cleaning cloth in her sweaty hands. She knew her daughter had an unusual gift for languages, but she never imagined it would one day place her at the center of a room filled with such powerful people. Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "If you can translate this by the end of the day, I'll give you more than double your allowance." The tone was half joking, but his attention was genuine. The deadline to submit the translation to their foreign partner was just hours away. Without it, a contract worth over $200 million would go to their competition. Isabella asked for a pen and paper and began to write. As she jotted down notes, mixing words in English, Arabic, Russian, and other lesser-known languages, the expressions in the room shifted from impatience to fascination. The scratch of her pen was the only sound, punctuated by the soft tap of her fingers when she paused to think. One partner whispered to another, "This is a waste of time." But before they could laugh again, Isabella looked up. Her eyes shone with a mix of discovery and urgency. "Here's the first part," she said, handing a sheet of paper to Arthur. He read it, and the expression on his face changed entirely. It wasn't just a translation. It contained a clause no one had mentioned before. A clause that, if true, could completely alter the course of the negotiation. "How did you know this?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Isabella just smiled. "I told you. It's not just about translating. It's about understanding." Before we continue the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and comment with your name and the city you're watching from. The air in the room grew heavier. Arthur held the paper Isabella had given him, as if it were made of glass. His eyes scanned the translation line by line, his expression growing more grim with every word. The other partners leaned in, trying to read over his shoulder. "This wasn't in the professional translator's report," Arthur muttered, his eyes glued to the page. The clause the girl had translated stated in simple terms that the foreign company would only sign the contract if the American side could prove the legitimate origin of a technology described in the document. Furthermore, a hidden deadline was embedded in the text, indicated by keywords in different languages, which pointed to a cutoff that was exactly 48 hours sooner than everyone believed. "Do you understand what this means?" Arthur said, looking up at the group. "If she hadn't found this, we would have already lost before we even sent our response." Murmurs erupted. Mr. Davies, the most skeptical of them all, cleared his throat. "So you're saying our child translator just saved a $200 million deal?" he asked, his tone a mixture of disbelief and unease. Isabella, sitting with her legs crossed in the large chair, continued to leaf through the next section, unfazed. "That's just the first trap. There's more," she said calmly. Arthur's brow furrowed. "More?" She nodded, scribbling quickly on another sheet. "They used an old technique that mixes languages and symbols to hide internal instructions. It's like a roadmap for anyone who knows how to read it." The partners glanced at each other, some visibly uncomfortable that a young girl had seen what experts with degrees from top universities had missed. Teresa, still standing in the corner, felt her heart race. Part of her wanted to shrink away and not be a bother, but the proud part wanted everyone to see the daughter she had raised alone with so much sacrifice. As Isabella wrote, Arthur moved closer, this time watching her every move. There was something about the girl's confidence that intrigued him. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, as if she had been training for this moment her entire life. Suddenly she stopped, placed her pen on the table, and looked at them all. "This second part," she took a deep breath, "contains a secret condition they never mentioned in the negotiations." The silence returned, thicker than before. Arthur swallowed hard. "What condition?" Isabella leaned forward, as if about to reveal a secret that could change everything. "They will only sign if they receive something you're not prepared to give." All eyes were fixed on Isabella. The soft hum of the air conditioner faded into the background as the tension in the room became the only thing anyone could feel. Arthur leaned forward, his brow furrowed, as if trying to pull the answer from her before she even spoke. "What do they want?" His voice was lower now, a whisper laced with urgency. Isabella quickly flipped through the pages and pointed to a section where words in French, Mandarin, and Arabic were mixed with strange symbols. "Here," she said, tapping the paper, "it says they will only close the deal if they receive the original development records for the technology, along with the final proposal. Not copies, not summaries, the originals." A wave of unrest swept through the room. The partners shifted uncomfortably, some letting out quiet gasps. Mr. Davies was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "That's impossible. Those records have been locked away in a vault for over 20 years. Arthur ran a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away the weight of the situation. "And without them, they won't even respond." Isabella nodded. "Exactly. And there's more. They structured the text so that no one would notice the hidden deadline. If you don't deliver by tomorrow night, they will consider the negotiation terminated." The clock on the wall read just after 3 p.m., A deadline that had seemed days away was now just over 30 hours. The temperature in the room seemed to rise not from the weather, but from the panic setting in. Teresa, leaning against the wall, tried to grasp the severity of it all. She didn't know about contracts or millions of dollars, but she knew something huge was at stake, and that her daughter somehow held the key. "What about the rest of the document?" Arthur asked, trying to regain control. "Are there any more traps?" Isabella gave a small, knowing smile, as if the question confirmed what he already feared. "Yes, but this last one is the most dangerous." A heavy silence fell again. For the first time, Arthur looked at the girl without a trace of mockery. "So what do you suggest we do?" She leaned back in her chair, took a breath, and spoke with the confidence of someone who understood the stakes. "First, you need to decide if you're willing to pay their price. After that, I'll finish the translation and show you how to negotiate this to our advantage." The clock kept ticking, and for the first time, everyone realized that the future of the multi-million-dollar deal was in the hands of a 13-year-old girl. The silence held for a few seconds before being broken by an impatient snap of Mr. Davies' fingers. "This is madness, Arthur." His voice was firm and disapproving. "We can't hand over those records. It's giving up our most valuable asset." "And without them," Arthur countered, not hiding his irritation, "we lose the contract, the partnership, and leave the door wide open for our competition." The other partners began talking all at once. Some argued it wasn't worth the risk. Others believed it was better to concede than to lose the opportunity. The room turned into a verbal battlefield, each argument more urgent than the last. Isabella, seated at the opposite end of the table, watched in silence. She knew she had no say in the decision, but she understood that time was against them. She picked up her pen and continued translating, isolating sections that seemed to contain hidden messages. "Listen." Arthur slammed his hand on the table, silencing everyone. "The question isn't just whether we hand them over. It's how we do it." He turned to Isabella. "You said we could negotiate this to our advantage. How?" The girl bit her lip for a moment, mentally reviewing what she had already read. "The document is written to create psychological pressure. They expect you to refuse. That gives them an excuse to close the deal with another company that's already prepared to give them everything." She paused strategically. "But there's a loophole." "What loophole?" asked one of the female partners, leaning forward. Isabella pointed to a section that mixed German and Turkish. "It says here that if you present equivalent proofs of development, they will consider it valid. It's not obvious to a quick reader, but it's enough to negotiate without handing over the original files completely." The partners exchanged glances, some relieved, others still skeptical. Davies shook his head. "And you're sure about this?" His tone was still tinged with disdain, but he was no longer laughing. "Positive," Isabella replied firmly. "But you have to act now. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to convince them." Arthur took a deep breath. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked at the girl as a key player in the game, not just a fluke. "Then we'll do it your way." Teresa, watching everything in silence, felt a mix of pride and worry. She knew her daughter was capable, but she also realized she was now stepping onto a field where even experienced adults stumbled. The clock struck 4 p.m. Every lost second felt like a rope tightening around their necks. The pile of papers in front of Isabella would have intimidated any adult, but not her. She adjusted her chair, pulled the sheets closer, and began to work as if she were at her own desk at home. The sound of her pen gliding across the paper was constant, interrupted only by strategic pauses to decipher more complex sections. Arthur, now standing behind her, watched every word appear in her notes. The other partners positioned themselves around the table, leaning in as if the translation were a performance they couldn't miss. "She's not just translating," one of the partners, a woman with blonde hair in a bun, whispered. "She's deciphering patterns we didn't even know existed." Isabella switched between phrases in English, Russian, Japanese, and even obscure tribal languages, but to her it all made sense. "Here," she said, pointing to a page, "they've hidden internal instructions inside historical references. Anyone who doesn't know the origin of these dates would never notice." Arthur took the sheet and read it, nodding in approval. "So they're testing us?" he said thoughtfully. They want to see if we're in their league. With each translated phrase, the mood in the room shifted. The initial mockery was gone, replaced by a mixture of awe and urgency. The clock continued its relentless march, and every discovery brought not just answers, but new questions. "What about this?" Mr. Davies asked, pointing to a strange symbol in the corner of a page. Isabella smiled, as if she'd been waiting for the question. "It's a marker. It means the following section is confidential and can only be interpreted with a set of codes that appear at the end." She flipped to the last pages, found the codes, and quickly jotted them down. "With this, I can unlock the final part of the document." Teresa watched from afar, trying to hide her emotion. This scene felt impossible to her. Her daughter at a table surrounded by millionaires, leading a negotiation worth more than they could ever imagine. Suddenly, Isabella lifted her head and met Arthur's gaze with a serious glint in her eyes. "The final part contains something you need to see now, but it will also force you to make an immediate decision." The partners shifted in their seats. Arthur frowned, already feeling the weight of what was to come. "Show us." Isabella turned over the last translated page, and what was written there made even the most seasoned executives in the room exchange uneasy glances. The paper in Arthur's hands trembled slightly. He scanned the translated lines, his face hardening as if each word were a calculated blow. The other partners moved closer, and the tension became palpable. "Is this a threat?" the woman with the bun asked, looking at Isabella as if hoping she would say it was just a misinterpretation. The girl remained calm. "Not exactly. It's more of a veiled condition. They're saying here, using a code that mixes ancient languages with military jargon, that if you don't accept all the terms, they will make a report public with information that could damage your company's reputation." A nervous murmur swept the room. Some partners' eyes widened, while others let out heavy sighs. Mr. Davies leaned over the table. "That's blackmail." "It's not," Isabella said, flipping through her notes. "Technically, they don't mention anything directly. It's framed as a coincidental release of information, but anyone who understands the code knows it's a clear message." Arthur took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the revelation. "So on top of demanding the original records, they're trying to intimidate us." "Yes," Isabella replied, "but again, there's a loophole. They write that the release can be avoided upon a full and satisfactory understanding between the parties. It's just vague enough for you to negotiate another condition in its place." The partners looked at one another, trying to process it all. Their respect for this young girl, mixed with disbelief, grew by the minute. This wasn't just a translation. It was a deconstruction of intent. "This changes everything," the woman with the bun murmured. "If we can use that loophole, not only can we avoid the threat, but we might be able to force them to accept less than they're asking for." Isabella placed her pen on the table and looked at Arthur. "But time is running out. They expect a response by tomorrow evening, and I still need to assemble the complete final translation to send." Arthur closed his eyes for a moment. He'd been through years of tough negotiations, but never one like this. When he opened them, his tone was different. It held a seriousness and even a hint of respect. "All right, you're leading this part." Teresa's eyes widened in surprise. What? "She understands the document better than any of us," Arthur said, facing his partners. "If anyone has an objection, they have until the end of the day to present an alternative." No one spoke. The decision was made. Isabella pulled a fresh notepad toward her, organized the original document and her notes into neat piles, and the simple act radiated control. For the first time, the millionaires at the table saw her not as an intruder, but as an equal in this mission. "First things first," she began in a firm voice, "we need to understand they aren't just negotiating a contract. They're testing you, watching your every reaction. If they sense hesitation or weakness, they'll push their demands even further." The partners listened in silence. Isabella's tone wasn't arrogant but confident. She began to draw a 2-column chart. What they want, and what we can offer instead. The idea is to replace their riskiest demands with alternatives that seem advantageous to them but don't compromise the secret of the records, she explained. And as for the clause about releasing damaging information, we can turn that into a commitment for future technological cooperation without handing over the files directly. Arthur crossed his arms, analyzing her logic. That will require a delicate touch, so it doesn't look like we're dodging their requests. Exactly. And that's where the right words come in, Isabella replied, writing down sample phrases that maintained a cordial tone but set clear boundaries. Mr. Davies, still skeptical, moved closer to see her notes. Do you really think they'll accept trading original records for equivalent proofs? Isabella looked him in the eye without flinching. I think if I present the translation with the right context, and you all know how to back it up in the negotiation, they won't risk losing the deal. The girl asked for a laptop. An assistant brought one, and she began typing with agility, reviewing each section of the document and assembling a bilingual file, the original text next to the final translation. As she typed, she inserted explanatory notes so that every term would be understood in its precise context. Teresa watched from her post with a mix of pride and apprehension. She knew her daughter was doing something great, but she also felt the immense weight of that responsibility. I need someone to send me the technical information on the technology you're offering, Isabella requested. I can't build solid arguments without understanding what you have. Arthur gestured to one of the directors. Get her whatever she needs. The trust, which had been non-existent hours before, was beginning to solidify. But everyone knew that even with the right plan, the real battle was yet to come. Without looking up from the keyboard, Isabella let a final thought slip out. The hard part isn't translating. It's convincing people who think they've already won. The lights of the boardroom reflected off the keyboard as Isabella typed relentlessly. With each translated line, she paused briefly to select the perfect word, one that conveyed the precise meaning without leaving room for dangerous interpretations. This was more than just converting text from one language to another. It was about shaping the message to be both persuasive and strategic. The partners watched her as if she were a seasoned expert. Even Mr. Davies, who had spent most of the meeting in doubt, kept his eyes fixed on her, trying to follow her rapid train of thought. We can't appear desperate, Isabella said, not taking her eyes off the screen. The translation needs to project confidence. Even when we concede a point, it has to look like we're offering a gift, not meeting a demand. She highlighted a sentence and pointed it out to Arthur. Here, for example, the original uses a verb that literally means to surrender. If we translate it that way, it sounds submissive. But if we use to share, it changes the tone completely. Arthur nodded, realizing the significance of the choice. You have an instinct for this. That could make all the difference. It won't just make a difference, it will be the difference, Isabella corrected him with a slight smile. She alternated her gaze between the physical document and the digital file, typing with speed and precision. When she came across a coded section, she would stop to decipher it, sometimes scribbling symbols on paper and cross-referencing them with words from other pages. They repeat these symbols 3 times, she commented, showing the blonde woman. That means it's a priority clause for them. This is where we can offer an alternative that seems to have equal value. As she worked, Teresa quietly approached and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. The gesture was silent, but it said everything. I'm here with you. Isabella didn't look up, but a quick smile flashed across her face before she refocused. When this is sent, they'll realize that we've understood the entire document, Isabella said, looking up at everyone at the table. And more importantly, that they can't fool us. Mr. Davies crossed his arms. You seem to know exactly how they'll react. Isabella leaned back in her chair. I do. And that's why we need to be ready for the counteroffer they're going to send. The silence that followed was no longer one of disbelief, but of anticipation. Everyone, including Arthur, knew the real game would begin after that email was sent. The sound of keys clicking filled the concentrated silence of the room. Isabella reviewed every line of the document with the meticulous care of someone who knew a single slip-up could cost millions. On the screen, the text was split into 2 columns, the original and the final translation, with highlighted notes explaining the context of each phrase and the true intention behind the words. Arthur, now sitting beside her, followed the process closely. His initial mockery had completely transformed into rapt attention. He no longer saw a 13-year-old girl. He saw a professional capable of steering the entire negotiation. It's ready, Isabella said, saving the file with a simple yet strategic name. It's worded perfectly to make them think they have the upper hand, when in reality, we're the ones in control. The partners leaned in to see the result. The woman with the blonde bun let out an impressed sigh. "It's flawless." Mr. Davies, though reluctant, nodded in agreement. "There's no denying it. This is far beyond what any of us expected." Isabella plugged in a flash drive and copied the file. Then she opened Arthur's corporate email. "You need to send this, but not right now." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean?" "The deadline is tomorrow. If we send it now, they'll have time to strategize a counterattack before they feel the pressure. We'll send it late in the afternoon, so it lands in their inbox near their closing time. That way, they'll spend all night thinking about our proposal." The strategy made immediate sense to everyone. It was a psychological move, not just a linguistic one. As they waited, Isabella reviewed the key points again, coaching Arthur on the tone he should adopt if they needed an emergency meeting. His phone buzzed twice with notifications, but he ignored them. Nothing was more important than this. At 5:58 p.m., Isabella looked at Arthur and gave a firm nod. Now, he clicked send. The soft whoosh of the email being sent echoed like a starting pistol. The tension in the room briefly dissolved, replaced by a quiet anticipation. "And now what?" asked the woman in the bun. Isabella closed the laptop and rested her hands on the table. "Now we wait, but we don't relax. They will respond, and their response won't be simple." Arthur leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the wait. The match was in play, and the next move would come from the other side of the world. Night fell over the city, but no one at Sterling and Associates seemed ready to leave. Arthur had dismissed most of the staff, but the partners and Isabella remained in the boardroom, reviewing possible response scenarios. Teresa, despite not understanding all the details, stayed nearby. She said she couldn't leave her daughter there alone. The clock read nearly 10 p.m. when the chime of a new email broke the silence. Everyone leaned forward. Arthur opened the laptop and clicked on the message. The reply was from their foreign counterpart, sent by a representative whose name sounded as cold as the message itself. Isabella pulled the laptop towards her, her eyes scanning every line. The first part was short, almost too formal, thanking them for the thoughtful and attentive submission. But the tension came right after. "They didn't accept the proposal for equivalent proofs as is," she said, pausing to breathe. "But they haven't rejected it completely either." "Explain," Arthur urged, leaning closer. "They say they would consider the alternative if it's accompanied by an international audit report signed by an independent body." The partners exchanged worried glances. Getting an audit of that level in such a short time was impossible. Mr. Davies grumbled, "That's ridiculous. No reputable agency can do a full audit in less than 3 days." Isabella frowned but didn't seem shaken. "They know that. It's another pressure tactic. So we're trapped," the woman in the bun said, looking at Arthur. The girl shook her head. "Not necessarily." She flipped through her notes and found a specific passage from the original document, a detail no one else had noticed. "Here's the key. The original text doesn't demand the audit be done now. It just says it must be presented before the final closing of the contract. That means we can close the deal based on a commitment to provide the audit later." Arthur was silent for a few seconds, absorbing it. Then a faint smile appeared. That could work. But before they could celebrate the idea, Arthur's phone vibrated on the table. An international number flashed on the screen. He answered on speakerphone. The voice on the other end was firm and direct. "We want to discuss your proposal now." The disembodied voice filled the room with a heavy silence. Everyone knew this call could decide the fate of the negotiation. The foreign voice, with its calculated rhythm and thick accent, continued. "If you are ready, we can open a video conference in 10 minutes. Arthur answered without hesitation. "We're ready." The click of the call ending felt like a starting gun. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, mentally mapping out the next steps, then began giving rapid instructions. "We need to set up the camera so everyone looks confident, with no signs of stress. I want the final document open on the screen next to my notes, so we can respond instantly to any questions." The woman with the bun hurried to adjust the lighting, while an assistant set up the equipment. Mr. Davies, still skeptical, approached Isabella. "What if they ask questions that aren't in the document?" She looked directly at him. Then we answer with what's between the lines. Remember, they created codes to test you. I've already deciphered them all. At 10:15 p.m., the screen came to life. On the other side, 3 foreign executives appeared in a modern office bathed in cold light. Their serious faces gave nothing away. "Good evening," the man in the center said in perfect English. "We've received your proposal. It's interesting." Arthur kept his tone cordial. "We believe it's mutually beneficial." The man paused, as if savoring his control of the conversation. "But we have some concerns." Isabella, seated next to Arthur, had a sheet of notes in hand. She listened to every word, identifying shifts in tone, verbs that indicated doubt, and phrases that hid indirect messages. "Regarding the international audit," one of the foreign executives began, "we have no guarantee it will be conducted to our satisfaction." Before Arthur could reply, Isabella lightly touched his arm and whispered something. He nodded and said, "We can include a formal commitment in the contract with agreed-upon penalties should the audit not meet expectations." There was a brief silence on the other end. The strategy of turning their demand into a solid offer seemed to have made an impact. The lead executive's lips twitched into an almost imperceptible smile. "We will consider that. But there is another matter." The way he said it made everyone's heart race. It was the prelude to a new demand, possibly more dangerous than the last. The foreign executive leaned into the camera, his voice firm and calculated. "We also require a representative from your company to fly here in person within the next 24 hours to sign the preliminary agreement." Silence fell in the Sterling and Associates boardroom. The partners glanced at each other, while Arthur absorbed the weight of the demand. 2 hours, he repeated, keeping his voice even. "We're halfway across the world." "That's precisely why we're asking," the man replied smoothly. "We want to see a real commitment before we proceed." Mr. Davies let out an indignant huff. "That's impossible. There are no direct flights." Isabella cut him off without raising her voice. "They're not just asking for a physical presence. This is another test. They want to see if you can move quickly under pressure." The executives on the screen watched silently, awaiting their reaction. Isabella gave a discreet signal to Arthur and whispered, "Tell him you accept, but add a condition that gives us more actual time." Arthur took a deep breath. "We agree to send a representative. However, we propose that the signing be conducted via video conference, legally validated by local authorities, while our representative is in transit. That way we meet the deadline and ensure a physical presence shortly thereafter." On the other screen, there was a quick exchange of glances. The lead man's expression remained neutral, but his pause betrayed that they were considering the proposal. "That could be acceptable," he replied after a few seconds. "But we will need proof that the travel has been booked at the time of the online signing." "No problem," Arthur said confidently. As he spoke, Isabella was already scribbling in her notes. Teresa, watching from afar, realized her daughter was a step ahead, as if she already knew the next card they would try to play. "Then we have an agreement in principle," the man stated. "But before we move forward, we need to confirm one more detail about the technology." The sentence hung in the air. Isabella looked up, ready to intercept the blow. The foreign executive placed his hands on his desk and leaned even closer to the camera. His voice took on an almost friendly tone, but it was a clear trap for anyone who knew how to listen. "Before we proceed, we want to confirm the exact origin of the technology, who developed it, and where." In the boardroom, the air seemed to vanish. This was the most closely guarded information the company had, and as Isabella had already identified in the document, it was the heart of the entire dispute. Mr. Davies shifted uncomfortably. "They want access to the project's roots," he muttered. Arthur remained stone-faced, but inside the pressure was mounting. The wrong answer could give away everything. Before he could speak, Isabella made a quick gesture for him to wait. "I believe I can answer that," the girl said calmly. The foreign executives turned their attention to her, intrigued. The technology was developed by a multidisciplinary team based on research conducted within the United States, Isabella began, choosing her words as if walking on thin ice. However, due to the sensitive nature of the project, full details will be disclosed at the appropriate time, as stipulated in the original document you sent. There was a pause on the other end. Isabella seized it. In fact, in Clause 7, you yourselves state that the development history will be revealed upon mutual contractual guarantees. We are more than willing to honor that, provided the same applies to you. The man in the center's brow furrowed slightly. And what exactly do you mean by the same applies to you? That we would also like to know the origin of certain complementary technologies you are offering, Isabella replied without missing a beat. After all, transparency must go both ways, wouldn't you agree? A few of the executives exchanged clearly uncomfortable glances. The unexpected countermove had just leveled the playing field. Arthur watched Teresa's daughter with a mixture of awe and pride. He finally realized he wasn't just dealing with a talented translator, but a born strategist. The man on the screen took a deep breath and, after a brief muted discussion with his colleagues, replied, "We will consider this request." Then, as if to leave a lingering shadow of doubt, he added, "But this may alter the timeline." The mention of altering the timeline put the entire room on high alert. Everyone knew any delay could mean losing the deal. Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to maintain a calm posture. "We must adhere to the original deadline. Any change would compromise our planning and alignment with other project stakeholders." The foreign executive offered a tight smile. "We understand, but this is a delicate process. If you want our origin information, we will have to reassess the schedule." Isabella quickly scanned her notes, her eyes darting across the pages as if searching for a key puzzle piece. Then she raised her voice. "The deadline doesn't have to change. You yourselves wrote in Clause 9 that additional conditions will be adjusted in parallel with the ongoing negotiations, without interfering with the dates established in the main contract." The reaction was immediate. The man in the center glanced at a colleague who frowned, realizing the girl was quoting their own document word for word. "This puts us in an interesting position," the executive said, pausing to find the right word. Arthur pressed the advantage. "So we are aligned on maintaining the deadline." The executive nodded slowly. "We are, provided we can move forward with the information exchange." Isabella knew the negotiation was now on a knife's edge. They had the upper hand, but one wrong move could lose it all. "I suggest we formalize this tonight," she said. "A simple addendum to the preliminary agreement, confirming the deadline and the information exchange clause. I can prepare it myself and send it for immediate review." "The woman with the blonde," Bunn murmured. "That will force them to commit now, with no room to back out later." The silence from the other side of the screen lasted for several long seconds. Finally, the man replied, "Prepare the document." Isabella was already typing, her hands flying across the keyboard. Every sentence she wrote was designed to legally bind them to the deadlines and prevent any ambiguous interpretations. Teresa watched with pride, but also with the awareness that even this close to the finish line, one false step could be fatal. When the document was ready, Isabella sent it immediately. The final decision was now in their hands, and the clock was still ticking. The room was submerged in a tense silence. The hum of the air conditioner mixed with the ticking of the clock on the wall, reminding everyone that the deadline was fast approaching. Arthur kept his eyes fixed on the laptop, while Isabella, her fingers still resting on the keyboard, waited for the notification that would decide everything. At 11:47 p.m., the email arrived. A discreet alert popped up on the screen, but the effect was instantaneous. Everyone leaned forward, as if getting closer could speed up the reading. Arthur clicked on the first line, a polite formality. The second line held the confirmation. "We accept the proposed addendum and will adhere to the original deadline. The information exchange will proceed under the agreed-upon terms." The tension in the air began to dissolve, but the real impact came in the following lines. "We consider your proposal a sign of competence and seriousness. We are prepared to sign the preliminary agreement tomorrow, with the audit scheduled for the future date." The partners exchanged looks of disbelief. Some smiled discreetly. Others sighed as if a massive weight had been lifted. Mr. Davies, once so resistant, looked at Isabella and said, I think we owe her more than we can imagine. Arthur closed the laptop and stood up, walking over to the girl. For the first time, his expression held no trace of arrogance. "You didn't just translate a document," he said. "You saved this contract." Isabella smiled, with the serenity of someone who knew it wasn't just about winning. "I only used what you already had." The difference was understanding the words and the intentions behind them. Teresa, emotional, hugged her daughter tightly. In that moment, the contrast between the opulent room and their simple lives seemed irrelevant. What mattered was that a 13-year-old girl had changed the fate of a negotiation worth hundreds of millions. "Let's celebrate," said the woman in the bun, breaking the serious mood. But Isabella shook her head. "It's not over yet. Now that they know what we're capable of, they'll try to test us again in the future. We'd better be ready," Arthur smirked. "Then you're staying with us for the next one." The girl shrugged, as if not dismissing the idea. Maybe if the translation is good enough to be worth some ice cream afterward. The laughter that followed was light, but filled with relief. The negotiation was won, and the lesson was clear. Never underestimate someone who seems too small to change the game. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next videos.